Welcome to Protege, where we break down the invisible skills that actually accelerate your career. I'm Molly Jaggers, and the last few weeks we've been pulling apart what's really going on in work as we know it today, why the old playbook keeps breaking, who's actually getting promoted and who isn't, and all the different ways the ground is shifting beneath you. And today, we stop looking at the system and start looking at you. And this one might sting a bit because what's holding you back isn't your work and it isn't your effort. It's a set of skills nobody ever told you they'd be grading you on. Let's start with where we are today and tell me if this sounds familiar. You've been working harder than you ever have before, absorbing the work of people who got cut, managing through a reorg, a tool migration, and a new boss you've barely even met, watching entire functions get compressed into AI workflows. And somewhere in the middle of holding it all together, you realized something uncomfortable. The playbook you were handed doesn't match the game being played anymore. You got really good at the work anyways. Your reviews are strong, your manager trusts you with the hard stuff, and you're the one people come to when something's complicated or broken or on fire. And then one day, you decide to take a shot at the next role. And either you don't get it, or you do, and you walk into something nothing prepared you for. Managing people, influencing without authority, building coalitions, reading rooms you were never invited to before, and making a case for resources you don't control. And here's what hits you. Nobody taught you any of this. And there's a name for what's happening, even if no one said that out loud yet. It's called an invisible promotion. More responsibility, higher level skills required, but no title change and no pay change. Just the quiet understanding that you're now operating above your job description and that the people evaluating you have no idea whether to reward it or expect it. Now, this isn't anecdotal. The data is brutal on this. The Society for Human Resource Management found that 71% of employers now rank emotional intelligence above technical ability when evaluating leadership potential. 71%. The skills that matter most for your next promotion are the skills that weren't in a single training program you've ever attended. McKinsey and Lean In's most recent Women in the Workplace report, same story from a different angle. For every 100 men promoted to manager, only 93 women. That's the broken rung. And it's not because women lack the capabilities. Research consistently shows women outperform men in 17 out of 19 leadership competencies. So, what's the actual gap? It's not a skills problem, it's an investment problem. Training was built around the technical side of the job, the spreadsheets, the systems, the deliverables, the stuff that fits cleanly into a development plan. But everything else, the influence, political navigation, strategic visibility, managing up, the system just quietly assumed you picked that up along the way. Figure it out by watching, learn by osmosis. And that was already a broken assumption before AI. Now it's a dangerous one. Because the technical side, the part they actually trained you on, that's the part that AI is absorbing first, which means the skills the system treated as optional are now the exact ones that now separate who gets absorbed and who gets accelerated. I mean, think about it. When's the last time your company offered a workshop on reading organizational power dynamics or a real session on negotiation? Not salary negotiation, but the daily negotiation of being taken seriously in a room where you're the only woman or you have a room full of conflicting ideas, or even a training on how to make your work visible to the people who actually control promotions. That silence is the gap. And it's not closing, it's cementing. And the companies that did used to teach this stuff, they've gutted it. The last 18 months of DEI rollbacks took the women's leadership programs with them, because that's exactly where this training lived. That same McKinsey report I mentioned, only half of companies are still prioritizing women's advancement. 1 in 6 have already cut DEI staff or resources. One HR leader literally told them, "We don't have a women's leadership program anymore." So if you're waiting for your employer to teach you how to navigate power, you're waiting for a program that's being dismantled in real time. LinkedIn just released their most recent State of Women in Leadership report. Women hold 31% of leadership roles globally, and this number has been silently slipping a couple of points over the last 3 years. And 62% of the countries they tracked reported the same or lower share of women in leadership than the year before. So progress hasn't just slowed, it's stalled. And in some places, it's outright reversing. And here's the part that paints a really stark contrast: women with doctorates face the largest leadership gap of any education level. Not the smallest, the largest. Their representation in leadership is 33% below their representation in the workforce, versus 27% for women with bachelor's or master's degrees. So the more education, the bigger the gap. So if this were a credentials problem, then more education would narrow the gap. It doesn't, it widens it, which tells you what this actually is. It's not about credentials or certifications. It's a training layer the system refuses to invest in. And the people who invest most in themselves through formal education are the ones who feel this gap the hardest. So let's name the reframe. And to do it, I actually have to take you back 50 years, because the word soft skills didn't start where you think it did. Soft skills isn't a corporate phrase, it came from the Army. Coined in 1972 at a training conference at Fort Bliss, Texas. And the Army was precise about what they meant. When they referred to these skills, they considered them as skills you use when there's no machine to operate, the human part of the job. That's it. Not less important, not secondary, not an afterthought, just the skills that aren't about the hardware. And notice what the Army did next. They didn't shrug these off and put them on the back burner. They built entire training programs around those skills. Because soldiers who couldn't lead, couldn't communicate, and couldn't read a situation got people killed. Soft described the domain, not the value. Corporate is actually what muddied that definition. Somewhere between 1972 and now, soft stopped meaning human and started meaning optional, nice to have, secondary, the opposite of hard, which was where the real work supposedly happened. Companies spent 50 years promoting people on these exact skills while refusing to train anyone on them. 50 years of calling them peripheral while quietly using them as the gate. And here's what that framing did to all of us collectively, but to women especially. It made the skills that actually drive promotion invisible, coded as feminine, deprioritized, expected of women as the baseline, uncredited when we had them, and weaponized when we did it. A perfect system for penalizing the people who lack them and erasing the people who don't. Quaylen Ellengrood and her co-authors from McKinsey, they wrote a book called The Broken Realm, which I highly recommend, by the way. And they have this one line in there that I can't stop thinking about. They say training employees in soft skills has a bigger payoff in the long run because these skills are evergreen. Empathy, negotiation, collaboration, those will never be outdated. Whereas specific hard skills, especially STEM skills, can go obsolete in a single product cycle. Let's break that down more plainly. The skills the world called soft are the skills that last. And the skills the world called hard are the skills that get automated, replaced, or reshuffled. And we're watching that play out in real time. Every week, another headline about AI absorbing another function: coding, writing, analysis, middle management. The skills that can't be absorbed: judgment, influence, reading a room, leading through ambiguity. These are the skills the corporate world spent 50 years calling soft. But now they're the ones deciding who survives this shift. And the premium on them is only going to go up from here. And there's one piece of this I want to sit with, because it's the quiet lie that holds the whole system in place. We've been told implicitly that these skills are innate, that some people just have it. that they're born with executive presence, with charisma, with whatever the corner office version of the it factor is supposed to be. And if you don't have it, well, that's just who you are. But that's not true. And it never was. Ellen Groot's research is clear on this. Some of these skills, her example is advanced communication, they're actually easier to teach than certain technical ones, the ones that we called hard. Sit with that for a second. The skills the system refused to train are, in some cases, easier to teach than the ones it spent millions training you on. It's not that the skills are soft, it's that nobody sat us down and taught them. That's this investment problem at its core. The system could have trained these skills easier than a lot of the technical ones, in fact. It just didn't. And here's the compression I want you to hold on to through the rest of this. These aren't soft skills, they're power skills. They're the skills that determine who leads and who doesn't. Think of them as promotion currency that nobody gave you the training to earn. So let's get specific because I don't think you need more motivation. You need a framework to start to identify and learn these skills. There's 5 power skills in particular that actually drive the move from individual contributor into leader the most. They're not the only ones that matter, but if you had to pick 5 to focus on first, these are what the data supports and what the practice demands. And you probably already have pieces of a lot of them. But what you may not have is the language, the permission, or the deliberate practice. Power skill number 1, strategic self advocacy, not self promotion. The skill is all about translation, the ability to connect what you've done with what the organization needs in language that makes a decision maker's job easier. Now, most people get this wrong by leading with the effort. I've been working on X, Y, and Z. A decision maker doesn't need your log. They need to understand why your work matters to what they're trying to accomplish. So, this is how you can kind of translate that from outputs to outcomes. Before any conversation where you want visibility, ask yourself, what does this person need to decide next? And how does my work make that easier? That's the anchor. That's your whole prep. And here's what that sounds like in a one on one. The cross functional project I led last quarter cut handoff time by 30%. That directly supports the Q2 efficiency goals you flagged. I'd like to lead the next phase. That's not bragging. That's making it easy for someone to say yes to you. Now, most of that self advocacy has to happen in a conversation that doesn't always feel comfortable, which brings us to skill 2 of having a difficult conversation. 73% of managers cite difficult conversations as their number one skill gap. 3 out of 4 managers are winging the hardest part of the job. Now, Alex Carter, she runs the mediation clinic at Columbia Law. She has a line about this that I love. She says the first step of any difficult conversation is to have it with yourself first. Because the conversation doesn't go sideways because you said the wrong thing. It goes sideways because you walked in without knowing what you wanted. Now, this is one that I actively practice every week. Every Sunday night, I look at the week ahead of me and I ask myself one question. Is there a conversation I'm avoiding? If the answer is yes, I block out 20 minutes to prep. Not script it word for word, but prep by getting clear on what outcome I'm actually after. 20 minutes and one question changes my entire week because I've mentally anchored myself on my target outcomes and given myself time to prepare. Now, skill 3 is one that trips almost everyone up who actually gets the promotion because the promotion changes the game entirely, and that's delegation as leadership. Maybe you got promoted because you were the best at doing the work, but now your job is to stop. Think of it like a star player who becomes a coach. The coach doesn't keep running onto the field, the whole game changes. Your value isn't in your individual output anymore. It's in your team's capability to achieve the target outcomes. And honestly, I got this one wrong for years. When I was in leadership, I delegate a task and then quietly redo it when the output wasn't what I would have produced. And you know what that taught my team? That I didn't trust them. And you know what it taught me? That I was still playing IC while collecting a manager's problems. Delegation isn't giving someone your to do list, it's deciding what only you can do and building your team's capability for everything else. And for what it's worth, this same pattern shows up with AI. The people getting the most out of AI agents aren't the ones reviewing every line of output before they trust it. They're the ones who learned to direct, define the outcome, and let it run. Same skill, different teammate. Now, the catch with everything we've covered so far, it mostly assumes you're in a room with people who report to you or who are directly evaluating you. But most of your real work happens in between with peers, cross functional partners, senior stakeholders who don't owe you anything. Which brings us to the next skill: influence without authority. Moving a room that doesn't owe you anything. The skill that separates execution from leadership. And yes, influence is a skill and it can be learned. Most of us just weren't taught it. And there's one distinction here that matters more than most people realize. Influence isn't persuasion. Persuasion is getting someone to do what you want. Influence is helping someone see that what you're proposing serves what they need. The direction is different. There's one move that changes everything here. Before a meeting where you need the room to move in a certain direction, find out where people stand on the topic before you walk in. Not to lobby them to your side, you're seeking to understand here. What does this person actually care about? What outcome are they trying to protect? Then when you speak, you're not pitching your idea, you're connecting your idea to what they already care about. Pre alignment isn't manipulation, it's research. And it's the difference between walking into a room cold and walking in knowing exactly where the resistance is before it surfaces. And to do any of that, to read what room needs, to know when to advocate and when to hold, to catch what someone isn't saying, there's one skill underneath all of it that ties all this together: emotional intelligence as strategy. I saved this one for last because it's the one most people get wrong. Emotional intelligence isn't a personality trait. It's not being a good listener or having empathy. It's a deployable skill with measurable ROI. Mercer actually ran the numbers on this and found that teams that score high on adaptability, one of the core things emotional intelligence actually builds, are 36% more productive and 32% more engaged. That's not soft. That's direct attribution to how these skills impact a P&L. And yes, women tend to be stronger here, not just because of biology, but because the world trained you to read rooms for survival. That training is now worth more than most technical certifications. Then the irony should not be lost on anyone there. So that's the framework: 5 skills. And if you look back on that list and count how many were actually trained, not picked up by watching someone, not figured out on your own, actually trained, most of you are probably at 1 or 0. And that's not you being behind, that's the training gap made concrete. Now, I want to tell you how I actually learned this because I didn't walk in knowing it. Early in my career, I was the execution engine. Give me a project, I'd ship it. Give me a deadline, I'd beat it. And I wore that like a badge. And I genuinely thought that if I was just undeniably good at the work itself, the rest would follow. But it didn't. I started watching people get promoted who I could outperform on any given Tuesday. And I wasn't really angry, I was more confused. I couldn't figure out what they had that I didn't. And then someone showed me one day, not in a training, not in a class. It was actually a manager I trusted who pulled me aside one time after a meeting and said, "Molly, you were brilliant in there, but no one outside this room will ever know that work is yours because you didn't frame it that way." And it was the first time someone had named that gap for me. Not a performance gap, a training gap. And the skills nobody had told me mattered. I'd been taught to do the work, but I'd never been taught how to make the work travel. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. If it stopped with "the system didn't train you for the test it's grading you on," this would just be another diagnosis. Useful, maybe, but not enough. I want to show you what almost nobody's connecting because it changes how you should be thinking about all of this. McKinsey and Lean In studied over 3 million employees across 124 organizations. This is the bedrock data set for women in work. And they found something that blew apart the entire ambition gap narrative. When women receive the same career support as men, the same sponsorship, the same access, the same skill development, the ambition gap disappears entirely. It was never an ambition problem, it was a support problem. The system wasn't just failing to teach you those 5 skills, it was using your lack of training on them as evidence that you weren't ready. You weren't less ambitious, you were less supported. And those 5 skills we just walked through, that's the training the system was supposed to give you. And here's where it gets really interesting. In that same LinkedIn report I mentioned earlier, there's a finding buried in the middle of it that almost nobody's talking about. In 60% of the countries studied, there are more women in director level roles than in experienced manager roles. Not fewer, more. A step up in seniority and women gain ground. Chief of staff roles in particular were 59% women. Cross functional strategy, compliance, ESG, the same pattern exists across all these functions. Now, I want to be careful here. This is not me saying that director is the safe path for women. Not at all. The whole org chart is getting rethought as we speak, and director level roles are not exempt. But there's a distinction worth naming inside all of this. Not all director roles share the same shape. A director with a P&L and a headcount is still operating inside the traditional org chart, which is also being rethought. What I'm pointing at is a different kind of director. Strategy, operations, cross-functional, the ones where you're owning outcomes across the organization, not managing a headcount down a reporting line. Set aside the titles for a second and look at the shape. Chief of staff is cross-cutting. No direct reports, no formal authority over anyone you need to move. Every result runs through influence. You're communicating upward with executives, navigating difficult conversations without rank to fall back on, and advocating strategically for work that's technically not yours to own, and reading the room the entire time. Every one of these 5 power skills in one role. When you think about it that way, some women skipped this concept of the broken rung. They went around it through roles that required all 5 power skills, often without the formal line authority. Because they had to, because nobody was going to train them through the management path, anyways. And here's something else to consider. Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Block, just published an essay on where the org chart is heading. And here's a compressed version of his argument. Essentially, middle management exists to route information, aggregate from below, relay from above. That's the function. And AI is learning to do that function. So companies are restructuring around 3 roles: individual contributors operating with full company context, cross cutting problem owners that they're calling DRIs, directly responsible individuals, and player coaches who both build and develop people, not route information. So, that DRI role, for example, I would say that chief of staff is the most obvious version, but it also shows up as director of strategy, head of operations, PMO lead, things like that. Roles that are cross cutting, problem owning, and with full resource authority and no permanent reports, and time bounded on specific outcomes. The role shape women have been taking, often because the main door was closed, is the role shape the future rewards. Now, there's a real critique of this model I want to name because it's the smartest pushback you'll hear. Where do future leaders come from if you eliminate the roles where people learn to lead? It's a fair question. But here's what most of that conversation is missing: the skills a DRI needs: cross functional influence, strategic judgment, managing without authority, holding a room you don't technically own. Those aren't learned on this clear cut management track either. They're learned by doing them, which is exactly what a lot of you have been doing for years. just uncredited. Ellen Grood and her co authors also make the same point from another angle. They write, and this is a quote: after technology, soft skills are going to be the most critical growing skill category in the future. By 2030, workers in the US and Europe will spend 24% more hours on those skills, the skills that technology can't replace. So look at the whole shape of this. The system failed to invest in training you. You built the skills anyway. You took the role shapes that required them. And now those skills and those role shapes are the ones the new org chart is being built around. So when you think about it that way, the ground didn't just shift under your feet. In a sense, it moved towards you. And if you're on the individual contributor side of that line right now, if you were laser focused on moving into leadership but see everything changing and wondering, well, what the hell do I do now? This is your map. The move isn't wait for the promotion and hope the rung holds. It's to start operating in that shape before it has a title. The cross functional project that nobody's volunteering for, the problem that crosses team lines and has no clear owner, the outcomes that require you to move people into action who don't report to you. That's not extra credit. That's how you build the portfolio. It's how you become sponsorable for the role that's actively being built. Okay, so let's put this into action. One skill, one move this week. Look at the 5 power skills that we talked about today and pick the one where the gap between I know this matters and I actually do this is the widest. Not the one that you're worst at, the one where the gap is widest. And then pick one concrete move from that. So if it's self advocacy, write one sentence before your next one on one that translates your last project into language your manager's boss would use. If it's the difficult conversation, do that Sunday prep ritual, 20 minutes. Prepare for the outcomes that you want to have in the conversation that you've been putting off and then have it this week. And if it's delegation, pick a task that you're still doing that someone on your team could own or that AI could automate and hand it off. All of it. No shadow editing. So, one skill, one move. And the ones who take this seriously, who pick one skill and make one real move this week, those are the ones building a portfolio of demonstrated power skills in real time. And that portfolio is what a sponsor actually backs. Because you don't become sponsorable by being the best individual contributor. You become sponsorable by demonstrating you can lead without the title, which is exactly what all 5 of these skills produce. And here's what I want you to walk away with. The skills the system called soft are the same skills the new org chart rewards. And you've been building them all along, sometimes on purpose, sometimes out of necessity, but always without credit. You weren't behind. You were ahead of a curve that hadn't arrived yet. If this episode hits something in you, send it to someone else who needs to hear it. The woman in your life who's doing brilliant work and wondering why nobody's noticing. She's not broken. The training was. And this is how we invest in the skills that matter. Next week, we're going to stay inside this diagnosis of skills. And we're going to go somewhere you probably felt but never seen named. The hidden cost of that first promotion, the loneliness, the identity shift, the emotional tax that nobody warned you about. Honestly, it's a conversation I wish someone had had with me before I stepped into that role too. Until then, thanks for listening, and I'll see you there.